Com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Aloha, and welcome back to the Sacred Matrix on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. I'm your host, Jetta Kara Lesson, with Dr. Sasha Lesson, my incredible co-host. And before we go back to our show that we have here with our special guest, Andrew D. Basiago, I want to remind you that Revolution Radio is listener-supported. So please go now and donate what you can. $1, $5, $10, $15, $20, $100, whatever you can donate is greatly appreciated. And we do thank you very much for your donation. Go ahead, Sash.
Just that you are now getting the opportunity to break the matrix and hear the truth about what's been going on. We have evidence. It's collaborated in all kinds of ways. It's overwhelming that what Andy is saying is right. And once you accept the information, and any court of law would say, look, this evidence is consistent, and this means it's a new game. It's a new game. It's a game for honesty, and that's why I'm totally supporting Andy for President of the United States, because this can be a new day for America with Andy's truth.
For the whole world.
For the whole world.
Thank you. Andy, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for that endorsement, Dr. Lesson. Let me just say that I'm not only articulating what actually happened, it shows you how we were literally visiting historical events, and for that matter, mundane events in the past and future, over 40 years ago. But the truth of the story, and I'd like to sort of advance that discussion during this next hour, is I went back and I found forms of proof that show that I'm not only not making this up, but I can't be making it up. In other words, I proved my initial allegations, and I thought I might try to describe for your listeners what some of those proofs were.
Good.
Please, yes. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, the first one was I investigated Dr. Stirling Colgate. I had already told my research associates, people interested in my time travel experiences going back 10 years now. I first lectured about these experiences on October 30th of 2004 before a group of about 40 friends in Portland, Oregon, and Shiloh Inn in Portland, Oregon. And I've continued to state the true facts, but then since then I've proved the true facts. So let me describe the first proof. I had described how Dr. Stirling Colgate, who was then president and dean of physics, director or chair of the physics department at New Mexico Institute of Science and Technology in Socorro, New Mexico, had sent me to Gettysburg along with consultation from my late father, Raymond F. Basiago, of one of the world's leading process engineering companies and defense contractors, Parsons Corporation of Pasadena, California, but then they were still in New York City, had sent me to Gettysburg in 1863. And I was pointing to the photograph saying, you may not believe me, but my father corroborated the fact that I was that boy in the Josephine Cobb image of Lincoln at Gettysburg, the Matthew Brady image named for the photo analyst at the Library of Congress who found the 2 pixels of Lincoln's head on the dais in the background of that famous photograph. For many years, even up to 2007, that was the sole surviving photograph of Lincoln at Gettysburg. So I took those key facts. I took Stirling Colgate, New Mexico Institute of Science and Technology, Socorro, New Mexico, and plasma confinement, and the date, 1972, the year that he sent me to Gettysburg. And in September of 2004, the month before I first lectured, but after I had told a number of friends about my experiences around their kitchen table and so forth. I mean, one of my law clients, Mary Ann Brandt, remembers me narrating my experiences when I was representing her as her attorney going back to 2002. And what I did is in September of 2004 with my friend Dixie Karras from Vancouver, Washington, I went back to New Mexico on my second fact-finding trip, and we found Socorro. We went to the town of Socorro. We found New Mexico Tech. When we drove up to the parking lot there at the corner of New Mexico Tech at Bullock Avenue and Leroy Place, where the C-shaped building had been that was then the Aerojet Corporation facility back in 71, 72. Joy Thompson, the librarian of the research library at New Mexico Tech, was eating her lunch, sitting on a retaining wall right outside the library, the research library for New Mexico Tech, the New Mexico Institute of Science and Technology. She listened to my account that I was back investigating my involvement in a time travel project that took me very frequently, not just to New Mexico, but several times to Socorro, where I had interacted both on the East Coast and there in Socorro, New Mexico, with the then president and chair of the physics department, Dr. Stirling Colgate. She brought me into the special collections of the New Mexico Tech Research Library and handed me the Stirling Colgate photo file, which was a set of still photographs in a manila envelope. And I opened it up, and the first thing I found was a newspaper clipping. It was the clip file for Stirling Colgate, both newspaper clippings and photographs. And the first newspaper clipping I took out said, Dr. Stirling Colgate, president of New Mexico Tech, will give a public lecture on such and such a date, on his advances in plasma confinement, and it was dated in early 1972.
Wow.
Now I have a photograph of that newspaper clipping on CD-ROM, so it will not be lost. So how could somebody growing up in New Jersey even have an advanced psychic experience and put together that many discrete esoteric facts? It's impossible without having lived. Even if I was taken on some kind of branch reality and actually had my time travel experiences but through the lens of a non-ordinary context, rather than through the lens of the ordinary context that I believe I did, even if we were to assume arguendo, if we were to stipulate that, yes, my time travel experiences happened, they weren't dreamed or the result of fantasy or mistake or delusion, but they were lived directly by me, but in a non-ordinary context of some kind, that begs the question how I could have put such as esoteric and discrete facts together, even in a non-ordinary set of experiences, in the nature of, experiences that we're now looking at, like the near-death experience or alien abduction. What I'm saying is,
too many details. It couldn't have possibly have constructed them. Yeah.
Look at the unusual nature of the scientist identified, Dr. Stirling Colgate. Did I name some big university that somebody who grew up in New Jersey would know, like Rutgers or Princeton or Columbia or Harvard or something, or UCLA? Or teams that I saw, colleges that I saw through watching college football games growing up? No. I identified the New Mexico Institute of Science and Technology. Then I described an esoteric technical process that he was just giving public lectures in for his advances in 1972. And then I put them all together in the context of New Mexico Tech being in Socorro, where the only reference that most people of my generation have heard of Socorro was the famous UFO sightings report by Sergeant Lonnie Zamora in Socorro in 1964. That event, that UFO event, is in the standard canon of famous UFO sightings cases or events, like the Benning Barney Hill abduction or the Exeter, New Hampshire sightings. The Lonnie Zamora, because he was a law enforcement official who was known for being sober and honest. And so great deference was given that sighting as a reliable sighting. So that was the first proof that I was describing an actual lived experience, actually time traveling to Gettysburg, because I was naming the name of the scientist, his institution, where it was located, what his position was, and what the name of the esoteric technology was. I'm sorry, but I would even say to the remote viewers and the great psychics of our time, I was so specific I had to have lived it. Number two was the Josephine Cobb image.
Wait, can I ask a question first? What happened to the things that you were wearing that you got when you were in the past? Did any of those artifacts, those physical objects, come back with you?
Yes. Plasma confinement sets up a kind of an aura around the person, and so their clothes, being close to the body, go back to the present with them. And what actually happened was the shoes just deteriorated on the floor there of the plasma confinement chamber, and I kind of stepped out of them and pulled the remnants of my shoes off my feet at the same time. By being brought 109 years in the future, that leather, which was already considerably worn and aged as being a pair of used men's street shoes, just fell apart. So it was almost as if I had 2 pouches of desiccated burlap on my feet that I just sort of tore away.
What about the coat and hat?
Those were removed from me, and clearly, like in any other episode of time traveling, anything I took back from the past to the future was sequestered there. I couldn't leave the facility with it because that would be a threat to operational security. So then there was the photograph. The photograph had been in the public domain for 20 years when several months after my trip, I took a magazine where it had been reprinted, and I had stated it was Life magazine, and I showed it to my father when he was reading the Sunday Times New York magazine, or Sunday New York Times, at his reading chair. And I said, "Look, Dad, when you sent me to Gettysburg, you got a picture of me." And he looked at it in the magazine and he said, "Yep, just don't talk about it." So that was another proof that the photograph was being corroborated as being real. By who? By my father. And what was he? He was the point man between Parsons and the CIA on Tesla teleportation. He was literally the government's expert on the theory and practice of Tesla teleportation. Number 3 is when I was in...
So this is fantastic. You have an actual physical artifact, the photograph that was taken then, that still exists and can be seen by anybody now.
Yes, the benefit to me of enduring the cost of not seeing Lincoln give the Gettysburg Address, which probably would have caused me to, I don't know, flip out. but the benefit that was the silver lining inside that cloud of being so disappointed in myself that I had kind of gotten spooked and I hadn't stood by the dais, even standing next to my dad there, and waited for Lincoln to arrive, was made up for the fact that I positioned myself in a way so that I was the first person to be photographed in a vintage photograph as a time traveler from the future. Wow. And that was more important than seeing Lincoln in the flesh. The next proof, besides figuring out who Stirling Colgate was and then getting all the facts right and traveling and literally pulling a newspaper clipping from the special collections department in his research library, the library, the university where he had worked for many years before becoming, I think, the discoverer of quasars or something at Los Alamos Labs, was what happened when I spoke with my father in a completely ordinary setting after they sent me to Gettysburg. Everything was normal at the house. My 4 elder siblings can testify that we grew up in a great family. My parents were remarkable people. They were wonderful adults, wonderful, marvelous parents. There was no personal anxiety or stress in the household. All of us were healthy, well-adjusted children. So they could testify to the fact that if we were just hanging around, the house after Mass on Sunday and reading the newspaper, there would have been, an ambiance of peace in the house. Every once in a while, one of the kids would get injured or something and be crying, but there was really very little stress and anxiety in our household when we were growing up. Hence, when I asked my dad when I could grab him, and buttonhole him without any of my older siblings hearing what I was talking to him about, he began to tell me about what it was like to view the Gettysburg Address. And among the things he said was, well, I wish you'd just stayed at the dais so you could have seen it. But basically, it was just a man with a beard giving a speech. And I said, well, how did Lincoln sound? And he said, that was one of the things that really surprised me. He said Lincoln had a very high-pitched voice, as if his vocal cords had been stretched, so that he sounded like this. He sounded like a Western character in a movie, like this. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought to this continent a new nation. And my father imitated this dry, rural, twangy, even stretched voice as he had described it, which would not only be consistent with Lincoln being born in Hodgenville, Kentucky, and then lawyering in Indiana and Illinois, but it was consistent with what we now know about Lincoln, which is that he had Marfan syndrome, which sometimes affects the vocal cords and creates even a twangier, even a stretched rural pitch to the voice. It creates a high rural twang. Now, my father couldn't have known that because the discovery of Lincoln's Marfan syndrome came later. So when he was telling me what Lincoln sounded like in 1972, and that being consistent with a symptom of Marfan syndrome, that establishes the rebuttable presumption that my father went to Gettysburg. Because how else could he have described one of the symptoms